Oh, hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Daniella Rempe. I'm an assistant professor at the Jackson School of Geosciences, and I'm going to represent my team in our project on linking plant strategies to complex subsurface hydrology to predict ecosystem carbon storage across Texas. And this is a project that has been funded by ExxonMobil through the work of the UT Energy Institute, and we're just now kicking off in this past year. And so I'll be sharing with you a lot of motivation behind this work and some of our preliminary results. And so I'm representing a big team across campus. The big crux of this project is that we've got biologists and geoscientists talking to each other about near surface processes and about carbon capture and storage and ecosystem carbon storage. And so I'm representing Caroline Farrior, who's an assistant professor in integrative biology, and Amy Wolf, as well as an assistant professor in integrative biology, Tim Kite, and then Ashley Matheny's, who is a professor in the Department of Geologic Sciences with me, and Dana Chadwick, who was with us as a postdoc and is now at NASA JPL. And so the motivation for our project is that there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty in terms of the future of the carbon cycle and the water cycle when it comes to the role of the biosphere and the role of plants. And so the goal of this project is to reduce uncertainty. And the goal here specifically is to better understand the role of plants in carbon storage and in CO2 sequestration from the atmosphere, and whether their activity below ground constitutes a carbon sink or a carbon source. And of course, this will depend on the material, and I'll give you a little more background in a moment. But the goal of this project, is illustrated here in this cross section, is to link different fluxes below ground and above ground to better understand carbon transport and storage. And so we start with fundamentally fluxes of water and gases. Think about the role of plants in moving that water and in moving gases, and then the mass that is either in the gas phase or dissolved in the fluid phase. And that includes the transport of reactivity or carbonic acid that drives chemical weathering, and chemical weathering, including specifically the dissolution of carbonate minerals, which are prevalent in Central Texas, the location of our project. This weathering includes carbon, as you can see here in these reactions. And so over geologic timescales, the dissolution of carbonate or carbonate weathering, the entire process is thought to be relatively neutral, where precipitation of calcite, perhaps in the oceans, might any CO2 that was sequestered by the dissolution reaction is then reprecipitated. And so over long time scales, we have a relatively neutral reaction, but over short time scales, what might happen is that accelerated carbonate weathering associated with the activity of plants, or also associated with increases in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, increases in reactivity of the fluid that's draining landscapes, could enhance this dissolution part of the reaction, leading to sequestration of CO2 at timescales that are relevant to decisions that we might make about meeting our sequestration goals. And so the fundamental questions that we ask are, what is the role of plants in enhancing weathering, or perhaps routing any CO2 that might be in the subsurface as a product of, for example, microbial respiration, to the atmosphere? So do they enhance the sequestration of CO2 from the atmosphere via mineral weathering reactions and the allocation of carbon within their biomass? Or might the enhancement of, for example, woody encroachment or the planting of trees strategically, might that increase the flux of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? And there are many, many underlying uncertainties that prevent us from being able to answer this question at large scales, or even at an individual field site. And so those are some of the questions that motivate the project. And I should emphasize that the plant strategies and plant physiology that drives carbon storage are also highly uncertain. And so what our approach has been is to bring together biologists and geoscientists to better understand the interactions between plants and the subsurface. And so to do this, we have two key research tasks associated with this project. One is to develop a site where we can monitor these fluxes and understand how they might be evolving and their controls. And I'll tell you about our progress on doing that. And then we're also aiming to better understand how prevalent the interactions between plants and the underlying rock might be globally, and what rocks these plants are located on, what their hydraulic strategies are, and how these interactions might proceed in a higher CO2 atmosphere. And so to that first point, we've made some progress in better understanding the extent to which plants are interacting with their substrate, with rock. And so I'm showing you here just a map of above ground biomass in the continental US, emphasizing that the places that have a lot of biomass sometimes tend to be places that don't have a lot of soils. And that means that plants are directly interacting with rock. And so we developed an algorithm or a technique to better understand how much water for transpiration, evapotranspiration, is being sourced from rock, to better understand how prevalent this phenomenon might be. And what we found, and this is a paper out of our group, is that it turns out all the places shown here in purple and green are places where plants are consistently taking up water from rocks, suggesting that their roots and the root exudates that may enhance weathering are active across these areas. And in places that are shown in green, which you'll see some places in central Texas, those places, water is withdrawn every single year from rock, meaning that it's not a reservoir of last resort. It's not something we're only worried about during drought periods, but this is happening consistently. And so this suggests to us that this deeper rock is part of carbon cycling in a way that we haven't necessarily acknowledged before. Our understanding of CO2 effluxes from soil respiration tend to be dependent upon our understanding of microbial processes in soils. And now we have to extend this conceptual model to include fractured and weathered bedrock that commonly lies beneath soils in forested areas. And so we've used some field studies across California and Texas to validate these remotely sensed estimates of water use from bedrock. And I'm showing here on the top right the comparison of those field studies to our remotely sensed estimates that are shown as maps here. And what we can take away is that this phenomenon is not specific to a particular rock type, a particular plant type, or climate, but rather it's quite pervasive, which suggests that we might need to pay attention to this new conceptual paradigm of including rock in our understanding of soil respiration and water cycling across larger scales than, say, just central Texas. And so our next steps in this project are to better understand the species-specific water use strategies and species-specific plant physiology and responses to water stress from both a theoretical framework and from a field framework where we make observations and test hypotheses. And so that guides our field monitoring, where we've established a site about 45 minutes west of campus, thanks to the donation of a Jackson School alum. We've developed this field site that has a number of ways for us to monitor carbon and water fluxes, including inventorying above ground carbon via, for example, drone-based LiDAR techniques, above ground carbon and water fluxes through an eddy covariance tower, eco-hydrologic monitoring on the ground of plant water stress and water availability, drilling and subsurface characterization, including places where there are roots in rock, as shown in this imagery in the top right. We've done extensive drilling and coring across the property to understand the carbonate minerals present and their susceptibility to weathering. Notably, carbonate dissolution creates enhanced porosity, enhanced water availability, both to groundwater recharge and to plants. And so there's a lot of implications of of the work that we're doing, specific to Central Texas and other places underlain by carbonate bedrock. We've also been monitoring the fluxes of oxygen and CO2 through unique gas ports that we've installed across our field site. And to date, we've been able to see, because of our experimental design, where we're selecting 3 different land covers, an oak woodland where juniper has been removed, a juniper and oak mixed woodland, and grass. We've been able to compare these CO2 fluxes coming out from these 3 land covers to better isolate the impact of the plants on carbon fluxes and the fate of CO2 that might be released due to carbonate weathering. And so we have some preliminary data here showing strong differences between the 3 land covers, allowing us to test hypotheses about the role of plants. Importantly, we've been doing some pretty advanced detection of water storage in the subsurface, which is key to the above ground carbon storage in plants, or the converse, which would be the loss of carbon storage due to, say, large scale mortality due to drought. And so it's critical that we understand water storage in the subsurface. And so we're using geophysical techniques, including neutron, shown in a photo in the right, and nuclear magnetic resonance. And nuclear magnetic resonance allows us in particular to connect the pore spaces and the product of weathering and the pore scale environment that controls the transport of gases, the reactive gases that are needed to drive weathering and to grow roots, as well as the transport of both water downward that might have dissolved inorganic carbon in it and gases upward to the atmosphere. So we can connect pore scale properties to water storage dynamics by looking at the magnetization decay and inverting that for other features. We've also been able to use neutron across the site to detect that indeed a significant amount of water is stored. This bottom right-hand plot here shows water storage time series across a bunch of boreholes at our site. And what we've shown is that there are dynamics, and these dynamics are key to understanding the behavior of the plants and the water fluxes and carbon fluxes driven by the plants above ground. And so we're able to bring together both the below ground water and carbon fluxes and the above ground water and carbon fluxes and stores. And in the future, we hope to extend this monitoring to include actual water samples that allow us to detect the fluxes of inorganic carbon in water that might be lost from the system, so that we can better understand the extent to which these plants and their impact on their substrate that they're rooted in has on carbon cycling. And so with that, I will thank you and include here my contact info, and I'm happy to put everybody in touch with folks who are, the other folks who are included in this project. Thank you so much.